A quick note before we begin. This podcast dives into real, often raw conversations about life's most profound moments, from a labor's beginning to life's end and all the complexity in between. Some stories may be emotionally challenging or deeply moving. Please listen with care and know that you are not alone. Welcome to the Mamatoosa podcast. I'm your host, Atoosa Benji. Welcome to the Mamatoosa podcast. I am so excited to have my guest on today, Sarah Shealy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Sarah is a certified nurse midwife. She has practiced in the out-of-hospital setting and in the hospital setting. She has been a women's health care provider since early 90s, maybe?
1994 was my first baby that I caught.
Your first baby catch?
Yep.
In the midwifery world, we catch babies. We don't deliver babies.
That's right.
Because the mamas deliver the babies. And you are now a certified menopause practitioner.
Yes.
And I'm really excited to have you on today. First, because Sarah was the dean of my nursing school. The first time I watched Sarah Shealy teach was in nursing school, and I literally was in awe of your teaching style.
Oh.
And I was captivated. I'm still captivated by the way you speak and the way you teach. But I looked at her and I was like, I want to be her when I grow up. Your teaching is compelling. You clearly know what you're talking about. You're eloquent, and you had me at hello.
Oh my gosh.
So I'm so excited to have you on.
It is so sweet to hear those words. That really means so much to me. Thank you for saying that.
Promise it's true. And she was a tenured professor for 17 years.
17 years. Yes.
Of hard work at a nursing school where you taught in the classroom and you did clinicals.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And so our journeys brought us together. Now, this is such a great podcast because as Mamatoosa, you all know I'm a midwife and I'm passionate about women's health and I'm passionate about education and giving people options. But I'm also passionate in the holistic view of a woman's body that is not just at labor or just in the postpartum period or just at puberty or just in that menopausal season of our lives. And I think, unfortunately, in Western medicine, oftentimes we just hone in on one symptom or one time, and we lose sight of the fact that all of these things are actually quite interrelated.
Absolutely.
And if we pull the camera back and we look at the whole clinical picture or the life journey of this body, things begin to make sense. And I've thought this and said this for a very long time. And it wasn't until I called Sarah and I said, let's talk menopause on the podcast. And she said, well, how about we talk menopause, but we also talk prenatal and postpartum and all of those, and puberty and all of those things that bring us to menopause, because menopause doesn't just pop out of the clear blue sky at the average age of, 51? We are typically menopausal, or we haven't had our period for a year, but that's the average age of menopause. So let's chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Tell me what has been your latest and greatest discovery.
Oh my gosh. What a great question. I've had just the most incredible journey over the last 2 years since I studied for and took and passed the Menopause Society certification exam, because I basically came to this in need of my own healing. And I had a very difficult perimenopause, and I really couldn't find anyone who could actually help me with all the things that were going on with me. And so, like we do, I just was like, well, let's see what the literature says. Let's read the clinical guidelines. I ordered the clinician's guidebook from the Menopause Society and read it cover to cover, and then pulled all the articles and basically just downloaded into my brain so much information, which then emerged this aha moment, which is estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. These are our menopause hormones that we lose during the perimenopause period. And estrogen and progesterone we lose in a very disorganized fashion, which makes us feel really crazy, and it's very challenging. Testosterone is a little bit more of an even downward slope, but either way, all three of them are anti-inflammatory hormones. So as we enter this phase of perimenopause, we have increased inflammation throughout the body. And every single organ system suffers because every organ system has estrogen, progesterone, testosterone receptors. And especially the brain really loves these hormones. So once I was able to sort of understand this bigger picture of inflammation and the effect of inflammation, especially on the brain and all the other organ systems, it all started to kind of click for me of how do we approach this from a clinical standpoint. And just like you say, like we can't ever separate, like we didn't get here to however old we are now, without the whole history of how we got here. Right. And so for sometimes we think about, perimenopause as just like puberty on the other end of the reproductive, time frame. And in many ways, it feels like that, right? It feels unpredictable. It feels overwhelming. It feels like someone's hijacked your body.
Yep.
Everything feels very dramatic and outsized and just like really, really big and hard.
Yeah.
But we have the advantage at this end of it of having lived a life, right? Having life experience, knowing hopefully, right? We know ourselves a little bit better. We know how to manage ourselves. We hopefully have built some skills and can, learn from our history, right? And know how to sort of implement and manage different things. But the reality is that many people never really hear this from a medical practitioner, that what happened in all those years prior to perimenopause really can inform your perimenopause experience, right? Some of it is probably inherited and just sort of constitutional that we can't control. And then there's the parts that we can control. And then there's the parts that come from our history. So it's well documented in the literature, but this often doesn't get shared with women or doesn't necessarily get pulled into the medical record and onto the next practitioner, right? That any high risk condition during pregnancy actually makes you at an increased risk later in life. And especially the things around blood pressure. So preeclampsia, even just pregnancy-induced hypertension, preeclampsia HELLP syndrome, gestational diabetes, preterm labor, preterm delivery, all of these things have increased risk for chronic diseases later in life.
Well, it makes sense because the first thing when someone gives me a medical record from past deliveries, we know that if something happened once, it's likely to happen again.
Of course.
And that's sort of the trajectory of the body, right? It's already telling us that there's something somewhere happening that is causing this, and you are at high likelihood of it happening again.
Yeah.
So it would make sense that it would happen again, however many years later in another organ system for sure.
Right. So there's that. There's also the mental health aspect of it. And we know that if someone comes into pregnancy with a history of trauma or a history of depression or anxiety, we're likely to see that again during the pregnancy, but especially during the postpartum time. And then, of course, again during the perimenopause time. So one of the ways that we can understand this connection is that it is, and I had really not seen any other scholars or doctors talk about this until I listened to two different people, Dr. Oscar Serrallach, who is an Australian doctor that I've been working with over the last few years, who is the author of the postnatal depletion cure. So Oscar has pulled together the data from all the different areas that have to do with motherhood, right? And he's created a course that I'm taking now that's called The Science of Motherhood.
Wow.
And it's amazing, right? Because no one else, we have matriatrics, right? We have pediatrics, the study of children. We have geriatrics, the study of elders. So Oscar has created matriatrics, the study of mothers. right?
Wow.
Because we are unique when we become mothers. We have a unique neuroendocrine transition. So the second person who has spoken of this that I am just like the hugest fan of is Dr. Lisa Mosconi. Mm-hmm. She is a neuroscientist. She's Italian. I think she works out of New York City, out of Cornell Wheel, and she puts women into the brain scanner, pre, post, peri, menopause, and pre and postpartum.
Wow.
And really does the brain scan. And her work is incredible. She has some really great, easy to read, easy to follow books. And she has done 1 million podcast interviews. So I really recommend anyone who's obsessed with this, like just Google her, Lisa Mosconi.
So the brain fog is real and you can see it in the scan.
The brain fog is real and it's related to neuroinflammation and estrogen loss. So she's the one who really described this neuroendocrine transition, meaning that we go through, the brain in particular goes through transition related to the hormonal shift, right? So our first neuroendocrine transition was really in puberty, first major one, right? When we first start to produce the sex hormones. Mm-hmm. And everyone remembers how kind of difficult, challenging, fraught, dramatic that felt, right?
For sure.
But then in reality, women who are cycling are having neuroendocrine transition every single month. So I don't have to explain it to anyone that the week before your period feels pretty different than the week after your period comes.
100%.
And that is a neuroendocrine transition. So your brain is actually affected by the fluctuations of hormones. So this concept of balanced hormones is really kind of a misnomer. Hormones are constantly fluctuating and they're constantly communicating with each other. There's no really such thing as balance hormones because they are all up and down throughout our cycles and throughout our lives, right?
I'm still holding on to what you said about every organ in our body is influenced by estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Mm-hmm. So it would make sense that you're going to have cardiovascular issues or that women have more UTIs because the bladder is affected.
Absolutely.
Or all of a sudden someone develops diabetes because their pancreas is affected. I am just blown away by this.
Yes. I know. It's incredible. Like once you know it, you can't unknow it. And then it starts to color all the things that you understand about everything that we do. Because endothelial function, right? So the function of the endothelium, which is like inside the cardiovascular vasculature, right? Inside of all of our veins and arteries.
Yeah, the tissue level.
We like it to be when we're healthiest, that has a lot of elasticity. And then the blood pressure can be quite low. When we lose estrogen, those vessels get less elastic. They get more stiff. So then what happens if it's more stiff? Blood pressure goes up. What happens if blood pressure goes up? It's harder for the heart to work. If it's harder for the heart to work, then there's little micro damage that's happening to the heart. So women have less cardiovascular risk than men until perimenopause, at which time their cardiovascular risk comes up and meets the cardiovascular risk of men because of the loss of estrogen. So estrogen is a very important cardiovascular protector. Right. It's a very important protector of our bone density and our muscle mass and a healthy brain.
It's all coming together, Sarah.
Isn't it? I know. It's amazing, right?
And this notion of inflammation, it makes a lot of sense because all of the people who I've spoken to in this perimenopausal, menopausal stage, I'm asking for a friend, not that I'm there.
Of course.
I mean, just other people that I know in my life talk a lot about how sugar doesn't work in the same way in their body anymore.
Right.
Or alcohol doesn't work in the same way.
That's
like I used to be able
too.
to have a couple glasses of wine and now I have wine, I feel like crap.
Yep.
Or, I'll have a piece of cake and I don't feel good. Or I can't lose weight the way that I used to lose weight. Right. If I eat a little bit extra rice,
right,
I'm going to feel it.
Well, that's because part of the microbiome, so the healthy bacteria that is in the mouth, the gut, and inside the vagina, is dependent upon estrogen. There's actually a part of it that's called the estrobolome. Oh. So when we lose estrogen, our microbiome becomes less diverse.
Wow.
And we know that less diversity is never good.
Nope.
And anywhere, and especially in the gut. So we often see people come in perimenopause, new sensitivities to foods that they'd never had an issue with before, new constipation, or if they previously had constipation, worsening constipation, more gas and bloating. Mm-hmm. And this then creates more inflammation because we start to have leaky gut, right? So the microbes that are supposed to be staying in the digestive system and passed out in the exit into the poop don't get passed out. The gut is permeable. So those microbes pass into the body. And then the body says, whoa, that's not supposed to be here. Inflammation, right? Fight this,
get those white blood cells fighting.
Right? Mm-hmm. Then we have increased inflammation. This also leads to increased insulin resistance. And so this is where the perimenopause belly comes in. I'm doing all the same things, but I'm gaining weight, or I'm trying to do all the things and I can't lose weight. That's all related to the microbiome and estrogen, progesterone, testosterone going haywire. So it's been really an incredible and very satisfying clinical journey for me to learn all this stuff. Number one, I was able to figure out my own health. And I now, 2.5 years into like my healing journey, feel amazing and have energy and have figured out like what's my supplement stack that I need, what's my hormonal regimen that I need, what's my nutritional regimen and timing and, sort of the ways that I eat and the things that I eat. And then very importantly, strength training. Like it's just, we can't, because the other big thing, right? I'm always thinking, it's funny, like when I see someone clinically, I always see people as a former baby and a future elder.
I love that. This is so cool. Yeah.
And so I really think about someone in that whole lifespan trajectory. And so once we get to this stage where we're now, solidly in the midlife and maybe even a little bit past midlife, depending on how long we think we're going to, hang out here. Yeah. Our number one goal becomes to like make as much muscle as possible, because muscle is actually its own endocrine system, and it will support decreasing inflammation. So for like longevity and all of that, making muscle is like your most important thing, because making more muscle makes stronger bones. And
increases
metabolism, decreases inflammation, and, more muscle you have, the better your balance is, the more you're functional, right? Because like I'm now thinking when I'm working out, what's my grandma workout? Because like I've got 4 daughters. I know you have 4 daughters. So we're all going to like hopefully have like a bunch of grandchildren.
Yeah.
Maybe,
3 daughters
God
and
willing.
a grandbaby. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so how are we going to stay vibrant enough to be able to pick them up off the floor, to run around with them, to roll around on the floor with them, take them hiking, all the things, that we love to do. Yeah, to not fall and to feel comfortable and strong enough to lift them up and carry them and do whatever, we need to do.
The falling is real. I actually found myself holding on to the banister the other day, and I was like, why are you holding on to the banister?
Because you got to do more squats.
Stop holding on. It wasn't even, it wasn't physical. It was mental.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't need to hold on to the banister. So I've stopped holding on to the banister. I've stopped using the floor to help me get up because I don't need to.
Right.
I'm doing a lot more strength training and just feeling better and eating differently just from all of this knowledge that I've accrued, which brings me to so many places I want to go. We could spend 3 hours on the podcast, as with all of my guests are fascinating and brilliant people. Number one, it makes me sad because back in the day, we would take out the uterus thinking that was the cause of what was making this woman crazy,
right?
As in hysterical. So we take out the hystero, which is the root word of uterus. We take out her uterus thinking this was the cure. Or the lobotomy. Which was, let's just cut out a part of the brain because this is the part of the brain that's causing the issues, having no understanding, because practice of medicine is a practice, right?
Yeah.
Of this is actually a holistic problem, y'all. This is happening at the cellular level, the tissue level, the organ level, and the organ system level.
Right.
It's not just one place. So I feel really sad because this is. So, and I feel like I read a lot and I study a lot and I talk to so many different people this is all still so new to me. And I started feeling a little frustrated because I was going through just not feeling great myself. And, on your Instagram, once you start watching something, it keeps sending you the same algorithm of what you should be doing.
Right.
And all of a sudden, everyone's become an expert on this part of life. And I don't believe that one size fits all.
Right.
And it's what I love about your approach is that it's not just about, here, take this pill, or it's really the holistic look of what's going on in your life, what's going on with your stress. And what I really want to get to, and I'll tell you, I went to see this exorbitantly very famous, very expensive hormone specialist, menopause specialist doctor. And I told her, I just don't feel good. And she gave me a little something, and I took it and I felt worse. And I came back and I was like, listen, I started this, but it is not working for me. And she said, I need to put you on an antidepressant before I can treat your hormones because you need an antidepressant. And I was like, I don't think I need an antidepressant. There's been times in my life where maybe I have, but that's not what I'm feeling. I'm feeling like what you gave me is actually making me feel way worse than when I came in. And she was like, I can't see you unless you start this medication, and handed me a prescription for whatever it was. And I went home and I read about it. I was like, I don't think I'm going back. This is not working for me. Yeah,
it's a very paternalistic approach to be like, the clinician knows everything.
For sure.
And that's, one of the things I think as midwives, I think the midwifery philosophy is very different.
Very.
And I think when we're really following midwifery philosophy, then we really rely on the wisdom of the individual.
Right.
And every single first visit I have with someone, I say, look, you are the expert in you. I am never going to know more about you than you know about you. So I trust you to communicate with me about what is coming up for you. And everything we do is shared decision making. That means, and that's something that everyone should be doing in any clinical setting, shared decision making. Shared decision making means that I know more about hormones and the pharmacology and all of that and the options that are available to you. And I'm going to assess your situation, and I'm going to reflect back to you what I think is going on and what might help you. And if you say, you know what, I don't like that, I'm not going to do it, then I'm going to go, okay, well, the other options are X, Y, Z, right? Because how is it helpful to my client if I'm not going to listen to them?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
And I left.
Right?
And I left because I just lost trust in the way that she was treating me. And I think people leave, either take the meds or don't take the meds, but they get lost in the system and then back on Instagram.
Here's
that's telling you this, that, the other.
Here's the thing about trust, and I really see this a lot, is I think that a lot of women lose trust in the medical community as part of their postpartum experience. Because we have a gap in postpartum care in this country. And 2018, ACOG put out a call to reform and improve postpartum care across the nation. And there's been very little movement in that way because nobody makes money in postpartum.
Right.
It's included in the global fee.
Right.
And so there's so much that happens between the time that if you're birthing in a hospital setting, between the time you go home and the 6-week postpartum visit. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. It's postpartum standard time feels like 6 years. Versus 6 weeks.
It's so much has happened in 6 weeks. And if you don't, so basically there is very little education in the mainstream medical community about postpartum. So even if you do have an issue in the postpartum time, unless it's like a full-on medical emergency, then your practitioner really doesn't know what to do with you. Right. Honestly, they just don't.
There's nowhere to put it.
Same, they don't know about breastfeeding, right? Because it's not part of, same, they don't know about perimenopause because it's not part of the curriculum in school. So when we look at that gap in care, what happens is that a lot of women, birthing people, fall out of the mainstream medical system because they now are new mothers or new parents, and they're now very busy with a new baby.
Right.
So the baby becomes the priority. They're taking babies into pediatrician visits. So pediatricians probably more than anyone actually see postpartum people in our standard system, right? They see, because they're often taking babies in for whatever the schedule is, 2 weeks for well child checks, right? And so I know a lot of pediatricians will hand, a postnatal depression screening tool to the new moms, but they're not trained either. No, they're just doing it because they care about the whole family, and I think, and because like they're there and they see it. But ultimately, there's around the globe. There's very different approach to postpartum care, and we can really learn a lot by the ways that postpartum traditions in other cultures have so many things in common with each other, right?
Much wisdom.
They're all about rest, 30 to 40 days of rest. They're all about hot, warm, cooked food that is high in fat and protein and fluids, right? They often have adaptogenic herbs or lactational-genic herbs. They often have other things about what the new parent is to do with her body in terms of rest. So, for example, in the Chinese culture, it's called doing the month, and it has a very specific type of food that must be prepared for women during that time. It's usually soups and stews with herbs and chicken, usually, and chicken bones. So it's bone broth. So it's got the collagen, it's got the protein, it's got the fat, right? And then they are to not leave the home for 40 days. They are to be cared for and kind of really treated like a queen. And so depending on what culture you're looking at, they all have these similarities. And so that, to me, that evolved over thousands of years, right, of probably practice, right? And so because we don't have anything like that, we have a epidemic in the westernized cultures that are not following their own cultural tradition of postnatal depletion. And postnatal depletion is actually a term that Dr. Oscar Serrallach coined, and he wrote the book, The Postnatal Depletion Cure, because he first, like many of us, right, found his way there through a personal experience. And then he started seeing more and more mothers coming into his clinic who really hadn't recovered. And so for me, clinically, I also, over all these years, I see these postpartum people, and they might be coming in with a second pregnancy, or they might be coming in for an annual exam, and they say things like, I just don't feel like I ever fully recovered after I had that baby, right? And you've seen these women, they often have lost a lot of weight, or they have not been able to lose weight. There's kind of like two different, ends of the spectrum, but they mostly complain about being very fatigued. Often they're either fully like diagnosed depressed or just low grade depression, just low energy, kind of dull. They often have significant hair loss. They often look kind of dull in their eyes. The skin will be a little sallow, and it's like an extended time of both physical, emotional, kind of even spiritual depletion.
You're being taken, you're being drawn upon, right?
Yep.
It's the needs of your baby and this new role and the new family, and we don't even know what's happened at the birth.
It's all of that, right?
Whether there was blood loss, or there was a complication, or there was a surgery, or there was a trauma, or a micro trauma, or a big T trauma.
Exactly.
All of that is gonna feed into it, and we're already carrying on ourselves and in our bodies our lived experience of what we brought in before we even conceived and went through the pregnancy. So it's each package is going to be wrapped a little bit differently. As you were speaking about this trajectory of puberty and the neuroendocrine responses, and then in pregnancy and postpartum and perimenopause and menopause, I had a friend in when I was a child, and they were from a different part of Iran than we were. And every region of Iran has its own stereotype of how the people are. Like, I'm sure in many countries it's that way. And this particular area has the stereotype of the women are very, they take very good care of themselves. They don't overdo it. They don't overexert. They're very protective over their energy and their body. This girl would not come to school the first 2 days of her period. She would stay home. Her mom would make her a special concoction of milk and butter that were melted together a certain way that she would have to drink in the morning. If we were at school and we had to swim, she would not get in the water. She would not swim when she was on her period. She never took her socks off when she was on her period. And the rest of us who were all from different parts were like, what the actual heck? Like,
Right.
Come to school, put in a tampon, get in the pool. Like, you're missing school because you're on your period.
Right.
It's ludicrous.
Right.
Don't pump gas when you're on your period. You know, like their husbands or their partners or their friends or their sons or pump gas when they're on their period. Because there's this sense of vulnerability to the uterus. Like, you don't sit on a bidet and like wash your tushy because your uterus can actually take in that water.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of protection around it, which I was very, very judgmental of when I was a kid, especially in more of a Western culture. Like, come on, we're in England or we're in the US. Like,
Sure.
Who does that?
Right.
But then I see it in the pregnancy period too, where pregnant people don't lift up things that are heavy. They don't take off their shoes and stand on a granite floor that is cold.
Right.
You don't sit on the floor when you're pregnant or when you're postpartum.
Right.
You don't eat ice or suck on ice chips, which is one of the first things we give to people in L&D,
Right.
is suck on these ice chips.
Right.
And they're like, what?
Right. And I think probably if you asked any of the elders in that community, you know, why, if you asked them why, they would probably, similar to because, you know, I'm obsessed with all these things and I've traveled a lot and I've lived in China. So I'm always like, well, tell me more. Why, right? And the why that you'll hear from the elder women is, well, if you don't do all of these, you know, protective actions, you will suffer later in life.
That's right. It's your investment.
If you let your womb get cold.
That's right.
If you don't fully recover, you will suffer later in life. And I can't help but think I was very young when I first lived in China and first kind of learned about this concept. But I can't help but think when I look at like how much in Western, like in America, in Western culture, we have so many women really suffering in perimenopause. And I can't help but think that all these things are connected. And I'm not saying that like, if you did the month then you wouldn't suffer at all, but and there's not a ton of this, but there is some ethnographic data about the experience of perimenopause in other cultures. And it talks about that in Japan and Korea specifically, fewer menopause symptoms and later onset of perimenopause. And so if we go back to understanding the role of inflammation, right? And we understand that the neuroendocrine transition contains, and this is very clear now, that a neuroendocrine transition is indicative of a chapter of vulnerability. And so this like sort of traditional thinking is vulnerability of the body, but what we now know from neuroscience is the vulnerability of the brain, right? Well, and it makes sense, right? Because the brain and everything is connected. So this vulnerability of the brain and the way that Dr. Oscar talks about it and the way that, you know, we've talked about it in our course. We filmed a course. It's going to come out any minute. Postpartum Essentials, right? To help families who are getting ready to know how to plan, what to do, who to engage in their planning process. But one of the things that he describes, and I think it makes so much sense, is this vulnerability means that one unit of stress has more than one unit of effect. Right? So if you think about in postpartum, what are the drivers of stress in the postpartum? It might be relationship strain. It might be lack of support. It might be lack of access to nutritional food consistently.
Right.
It might be some kind of medical thing that happened during the labor or the postpartum. It might be difficulty or lack of support around breastfeeding, right?
Having to go back to work.
Lack of societal support,
Absolutely.
no maternity leave, all of those things. So all of those things are stressors.
Yep.
Outsized effect of that.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, one unit of support has outsized unit of efficacy for support, right? So when we think about how do we prepare for postpartum in a way that mitigates, because I don't think you can always completely eliminate, but like maybe makes it less likely that you have postnatal depletion. It really has to do with the support piece. But then there's another big piece that has to do with nervous system resilience, like knowing how to and being able to do the practice of deep rest that is not sleep. Right? So that sort of
yoga nidra,
whether it's, huge fan of yoga nidra, the healing frequencies, acupuncture, right? Really meditation, really down regulating your nervous system, because we know that the nervous system gets activated when we give birth, because we now are evolutionarily, we're responsible for this little creature to survive, right? So of course we're going to be hypervigilant. And of course, we're going to wake up at any little sound.
Right.
But
a little more agitated.
We don't want to get stuck in hypervigilance. And for many of us, and maybe if you were a midwife on call, perhaps you have gotten a little stuck in hypervigilance because you have to be able to answer the phone in the middle of the night and be like on call, ready to go, get in the car.
100%.
And so when we really, so like for my personal journey, that was a huge learning, right? It was like, oh, I see. So I became a midwife, and then I was on call for, 18 years, and then I was a mom, like all these things, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, ready to go at any moment. Well, guess what? That doesn't really help us when we hit perimenopause. For sure. Right? Yeah. So this window of vulnerability, I think, is a really important concept to understand as a driver for why you should make a postpartum plan, But postnatal depletion is really interesting, because I think that it was the first time when I heard Oscar and I read his book, when I really pulled all these things together, and it started to make a lot of sense for me and to understand how clinically I can help people, right? Because there is a real piece around nutrition and nutrients. That's a huge piece. So if you're walking around and your iron level is in the basement, or your B12 and your, D, of course your hair is falling out and you feel like crap, right? So like there are some very basic depletions that, and I see them in midlife as well. These are three most common is iron stores, vitamin B12, vitamin D.
So would it be fair to then say, or would it be accurate to say someone who has not birthed children or been pregnant might have an easier postpartum journey than someone who's had many children?
You know what? Not necessarily. And it's interesting because of course we don't have data. Like that's one of the data free zones that, there's very little data overall on women, because we only started studying women in 1993. Yeah. It was really not that long ago.
There weren't that many of us before
and then when you look at like the data of like how many studies do we have on perimenopause versus pregnancy, it's like we have like this much. So we don't really know, but I will say one of the greatest pieces for me in midwifing menopause, right? Yeah. Because that's what my practice is that I've gotten a lot of clients who come to me who have never given birth. And I love that because they then get to have midwifery care, right? And on this other side of life. But you know what? For all of us, by the time you get to this age, everyone has had ups and downs and lived life and had betrayals and stories and health challenges. And so broken hearts and all the things, right? Yeah. And so it's so individual. Like everyone's perimenopause journey is very individual. It starts at a different time for everyone. It can last 2 to 14 years. I literally, and then some people actually don't have very many symptoms. And so these are clients who I'll see later. They'll come in post-menopause, like sometimes in their 60s, and they'll be like, hey, I've heard that hormone therapy is important for my bones. I didn't really have a problem going through, so I didn't think anything of it. Plus, it was 10 years ago, so my, in the back 10 years ago, everybody was still really afraid of estrogen, so nobody was offering, and still a lot of times people are not offered hormone therapy. But guess what? They come back and now they've got bone density issues. They've got cholesterol and heart issues, and they really, they really benefit even at that point. But the bone density is a piece that is so interesting, because when we think about postpartum, there is a dramatic loss of bone during pregnancy and postpartum. But there is actually an enzyme that was recently discovered that protects the bone for postpartum people. The other thing that's very protective during postpartum is breastfeeding, because breastfeeding creates a huge surge of oxytocin and prolactin in the mother's body, and specifically brain. So the brain protection that we get from regular breastfeeding,
regular hits
because it's all pulsatile, right? Is really important. But then I see a lot of women, this is a very common experience, that especially women who birth later, so 35 and beyond, right? And we have lots of moms who are birthing at 40 or 42. I had, 45, whatever. They often can breastfeed successfully and well. And then when they stop breastfeeding, then their hormones fall off that cliff, and they then start to really suffer, because guess who's right there waiting for them? Perimenopause. Yeah.
So then it can get confusing, right?
It's super confusing.
And I think even for myself, when I started feeling really yucky, I was probably, I don't know, maybe early mid 40s. And I was in midwifery school. I was on call all the time. I was working 80 hours a week, responsibilities of home and work and life. And I was like, I feel awful, gaining weight. And I was like, well, is this, and some PTSD that started coming back in. So I was like, okay, is this the trauma of my lived experience? Is this the rigor of midwifery school? Or is this perimenopause? And how do I separate it? So if, for the listener, could you give us some nuggets, maybe 85 nuggets of what, if someone listening is saying, you know what, puberty was hard for me. I had a hard time in puberty. I didn't do well with the body changes, the hormone changes. And I actually want to touch on the social element, because we know that in puberty, children are more likely, or prepubescents or pubescents and teenagers are more likely to seek a social network and to not like adults and start to hang around people of their own age who understand them better. I'm finding that on this side. In menopause, where it's like, I feel like certain people just don't get where I am. And I find myself navigating more towards whereas in many of my circles, I'm the youngest. In some of my circles, I'm the oldest. Now I'm looking for my fellows here. Help me out, it's kind of like in the teenage years.
Yeah. It's like, well, I mean, I think you think about it as it's a developmental stage, right?
For sure.
And, there's nothing like being with people who are going through what you're going through, right?
For sure.
I think it definitely happens when you start to have babies too, right? It happens.
Absolutely.
Like if you're friends who are not having babies, they don't really want to hear about your babies, right?
And they don't get it.
And so you end up, and then you're not as available. And so a lot of times the friendships and alliances will shift during that time. And I think this is another time, perimenopause. And what I love is when, some of my clients come in and they're like, me and my friends, all we talk about is perimenopause. And I'm like, that's beautiful. I wish I had that. I just really didn't. Yeah. But I think
it was stigmatized, right?
I think, it was very different. I know. I'm so excited for the millennials, because they're really the first generation that will know about perimenopause before they get there. And we as Gen X will be the last generation that didn't know. Right? Every generation like our daughters will know all about this. So nuggets, let me give nuggets. Let's see. So I think one of the most important things that can be helpful at whatever stage of life you're at. Like if you haven't had a baby yet and you're thinking about what it's going to look like. Because I see a lot of the young women who are in my realm, they're doing a lot of thinking about this, right? As we do, right? We sort of fantasize and we project and then we make plans and, so to set yourself up for success at each stage, which actually sets you up for success for the next stage, a couple of like basic things is be as strong and healthy as you can be before you get pregnant. Have muscle. Know how to eat whole foods. If you are suffering from trauma, get therapy. If your relationship is struggling, go to couples counseling. And like sort of those basics, like shore up your foundation, right? And then if you are pregnant and you're, getting ready to give birth, don't just get obsessed with the birth. Like it can be so easy to get obsessed with the birth and do all your planning focusing on just on the birth. Like remember that you are starting your new life with you're going to meet your new baby and you're going to start this next chapter of your life. Pay attention, spend as much time preparing for your postpartum as you're doing preparing for your birth. And ultimately, your baby's going to be born one way or the other. Right. And there's not, it doesn't have to be perfect. Yep. It can be good enough.
Right.
So if you have chosen a practitioner that you trust and you are taking care of yourself and your partner and your sort of energetic realm that you have control over, it doesn't help to get too obsessed with the birth. It just doesn't. Right. Get obsessed with your postpartum planning. And that's not about what is the stuff that you need.
Right.
That is not about your list of items. It's
not about the commerce portion of it. Yes.
It's really about the support. Right. So if you have a limited budget, I would put that on a postpartum doula, someone who can come in and help you maybe with house cleaning, whatever will give you ease in the postpartum is worth doing.
Right.
I would take as much time off of work as you can possibly get away with. And I would come back to work in as little a way as you can, like whatever you can get away with. If you can come back part-time, if you can come part-time for 2 weeks, whatever, right? Like navigate that in a way that lets you really don't make any other plans during your postpartum first at least 2 months. And really do the month, like really just sit yourself down in your space, stay in your pajamas. Don't agree to do anything in the postpartum time.
Right. I love that.
Our detailed postpartum essentials, it's going to be a course and it has a workbook that I wrote. Is going to be out any minute.
So excited.
It's like going to be, it's really a great product and well worth it. But then in the postpartum time, when you're ready to start coming back into community, find your people who are also with new babies, right? Get help with breastfeeding. If breastfeeding's hard, make sure you have someone who like maybe meet them during pregnancy so that you know who you're going to call if you have trouble.
Right. Set up the plan.
Set up a plan so that fail to plan to fail, right?
Absolutely.
And then in that first postpartum year, don't have any agenda for what it's going to look like. Right? Because it's really just about survival that first year.
Absolutely.
And try and stay in good sort of relationship with your partner so that the ideal, like I always say, by the first birthday, if you can look at your partner and still feel like positive regard, and if you can laugh a little, like if you can hold it lightly, you win.
Yes.
Because there's nothing more stressful to a relationship than having a baby. Yeah. And so, relationship strain is very, very common in the postpartum time. And if there's any big sort of philosophical disagreements, misalignments, they're going to come up. So do that maybe before you get pregnant, right? Talk about it a lot, right?
And also your partner, whether male or female, is going to have hormonal changes with a new baby in the house.
100%.
It's what we often don't talk about is your partner is actually going to have responses, especially if they were in the delivery room and going through labor with you.
100%.
In a man, the testosterone has changes. In a woman, their estrogen and prolactin has changes.
Absolutely.
So everyone is sort of on this hormone merry-go-round,
yes,
affecting each other.
They're all on the ship
no,
together.
But you had the baby. Why do I feel like this?
Yeah. And postpartum depression in men is real too.
Of course.
It's real.
Of course.
So it's you can't plan enough, honestly, right?
Absolutely.
Because there will be things that will come up and it will be challenged, but you want to enjoy that time. So the more you plan, the more juicy and sweet and connected it can be. And that's the best way to start your family, right?
And don't make any major decisions in that first year either. Don't buy a new house. Don't sell the house. Don't get a divorce. Don't just keep it neutral.
100%.
Because it's a transition.
Yep.
And so, and obviously you got to do what you got to do. But in general, I say try to keep it pretty simple.
Absolutely.
In those first. And just real quick for the listener, you heard the word postpartum doula. I'm just going to say what a postpartum doula is.
Oh, yeah.
A postpartum doula, this is my analogy. Imagine if you have a really great aunt who knows all about babies and mommies, who comes in from another state and stays at your place and takes care of making you meals, doing
Food.
some light laundry,
Yes,
rubbing your feet, telling you how beautiful you are,
yes,
holding your baby when you're taking a shower,
yes,
making that delicious family chicken soup recipe that you've had in your family for a million years,
right,
and having the best boundaries,
right,
so that when it's not her place to be in the room or their place, they go into their room, or
That's
they go
right.
into another room, or they clock out.
Right.
That is my explanation of a postpartum
Yeah.
doula. It is a non-clinical role responsible for being an expert about a lot of stuff, but doing it in little ways. And it's a non-medical role.
Absolutely.
So it's education, it's comfort, it's, and I always, when I speak to my birth doulas about their postpartum visits, when a birth doula does a postpartum visit, postpartum doulas are the boots on the ground.
Absolutely.
Because they hand you a baby, whether your midwife leaves or your obstetrician sends you home, you're then like, oh, okay, great.
Right.
And then no one comes around for, if you're lucky, 2 weeks. And then in most practices, 6 weeks.
Right.
And it's like, really?
That's right.
What? So it's
where's the instruction manual?
Postpartum doulas save lives.
Absolutely.
They come in and they're like, wait, you haven't eaten for 4 days.
Right.
Your nipple is infected.
Right.
Let's call a lactation counselor.
Right.
Your pad does not look normal.
Right.
Let's take a picture and send a picture to your midwife.
Yeah, so even though it's not medical, they do have the training to identify emergency situations or things that medically should be referred.
Correct.
Absolutely.
And they refer out, and the power in that.
It's really, I mean, honestly, I think
it's enormous.
In some countries, everyone gets postpartum visits from either nurses or doulas or peer support workers. And it's really a downfall of our system. And, you know, you can never discount how little support we have for mothers in our society. And so I just want to shout out to another person who has an amazing podcast that you will love. It's called the Good Enough Mother podcast. And the woman who runs it is called Sophie Brock. Okay. She's another Australian. She is a sociologist. So her thing is the sociology of motherhood.
Wow.
It's profound and so good. You always learn something about that.
Wow.
But let me just finish on that clinical side of that postpartum is that it is very helpful to have a clinical visit with someone who is up to speed with what postnatal depletion is. I would say sometime in that first year. If you're feeling good, that might be later at like 2, 3, 4 months. If you're struggling or suffering, seek that out earlier. But I know that for many women, if they had come sooner and had a postnatal depletion visit, they would have suffered less.
And who are practitioners who can do the testing?
I mean, right now, there's not very many people. Right. So Oscar, the Matriatrics course that Oscar is running right now for the first time will be ongoing. And so I, hope that more and more practitioners will start to take it. Right now, there are some practitioners from the US who are taking the course. Many of them are in Australia, but it's designed for clinicians.
Got it.
And it's designed for also people who do even then, mental health support. So not only kind of, clinicians like we are as midwives, but also mental health support people, PT, basically when we think about full recovery from postpartum, there is the physical aspect. So that has to do with micronutrients and, sort of blood status and things like that. There's a physical piece of it that is, postpartum physical therapy, pelvic floor physical therapy. There may be an alignment piece of it that is osteopathy, right? And then there is the social piece that is to do with the relationship, the primary relationship, maybe the other relationships, if there's other kids, like that social piece and connection is so, so important for fully recovering. And then to have that understanding, of course, the breastfeeding support is always crucial. But then to have that understanding that because you have lost the placenta, right? The placenta becomes the hormone factory. And when the placenta leaves, you have this hormonal cliff that you go off. It's very similar to perimenopause. And so that's what creates that window of vulnerability. That breastfeeding hormones come in and give you some support through that time period. But it is very common and very possible that after breastfeeding is finished, that perimenopause is right there. So having a practitioner who understands perimenopause and how to support, often in perimenopause, in the early parts of perimenopause, you can get a lot of symptom relief from taking care of the depletions that are already there, taking care of how you manage your blood sugar and your nutrition, taking care of decreasing inflammation. So not everybody needs hormone therapy right away. And some people choose to not use hormone therapy for whatever reason is fine, but there are a lot of things that you can do to feel better. And it's also, I think, sometimes misunderstood that you can actually use hormone therapy during perimenopause. You don't have to be fully menopausal before you start hormone therapy.
And is there still a window in which you cannot no longer do it? Or an
There's
age?
that data really still comes from that study, the Women's Health Initiative, and it has been debunked. And we really have an understanding that every person should be individually assessed, with a practitioner to really assess risk factors and their own individual situation. So there's no data that actually supports that 10-year window is very arbitrary. Same as the term menopause is very arbitrary. 12 months, no period doesn't mean that, there hasn't been hormonal shifting and changing for years. 12 to 14 years might be for some women perimenopause. So, these are sort of arbitrary terms that we use to, identify this thing, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't like a whole bunch of hormonal chaos for years before that needed support and addressing.
Right. And just on a very sad note, you and I talked about this earlier. One of my friends last month, mid-50s, had a heart attack and was in the middle of a heart attack and was like, I don't feel so good, and put it on ChatGPT, and ChatGPT was like, you're having a heart attack. Go to the hospital or call 911. And she had 100% blockage in her artery. And the reason was she never thought she would be a candidate for a heart attack. She was like, me have a heart attack? Like, no way. And another friend, unfortunately, took her own life. And the statistics for women in middle age having heart attacks and strokes and taking their own life are high.
They're very high. They're very high. So cardiovascular disease continues to be the number one killer of women as after perimenopause.
Right. And women deny it more than men do, right?
Their
symptoms.
It often looks different. And it is often misdiagnosed. Because women can get gaslit. Oh, you're hysterical, you're depressed, you're having a panic attack, right? And there are actual changes that happen to the cardiovascular system that are hormonally related. So often women are not actually being fully screened for their cardiovascular health. And so that's another thing that I do with women is we get all the labs beyond the labs that get done in a regular standard annual exam. And I encourage everyone to go get a cardiac calcium score, which is a score that looks at, and a scan that looks at the amount of blockage that you might have in and around your heart. And that's not standard. The other thing I recommend everyone get is a DEXA scan, a bone density scan, because that one, as ASAP, get a baseline, right? Because they don't recommend you do it until 65, which doesn't make any sense because we have a peak bone mass at age 30, and then we are consistently losing bone gradually until we get to perimenopause. And then once we hit menopause, it falls off and we lose like 2% per year. So you could end up with like a 12% loss in the first couple of years of menopause. And it's very hard to get bone back. Right. So if you know that you already have osteopenia, the beginnings of osteoporosis, then you're going to really double down on the things that are going to help you to hold on to that bone. So that's a big one. And then,
which is strength training, plyometrics, lifting,
making sure that your vitamin D is at optimal levels, right?
Okay, which is 30 to 60.
No, it's actually much higher. It's like 50 to 80, and you're going to feel best around 75.
Okay.
So, yeah. And that's like a lot of practitioners don't know that because on the lab value, when it comes back, it gives the normal range
at 30.
Yeah. Which is 30 is low.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because you can think of vitamin D as a hormone more than a vitamin. It affects every organ system. Wow. It affects everything in the body. Vitamin D is super important. But that is a very sad statistic. And it's true that the highest rate of suicide in the United States is in the midlife women.
What?
Of suicide. Yeah. Wow. It's very, very sad, but it's true because you think about the lack of support for women and how we have been told we could do it all. It's just not true. And then if you're not succeeding at doing it all, then you feel like it's something that you've done. And then your hormones start to go haywire and you think it's because you are not doing enough. Oh, see, I'm not exercising enough, or I'm not eating good enough, or I'm not managing my stress enough, or I'm doing, like whatever kind of self-blame that women want to give to ourselves over something that's not going well, rather than going, maybe my hormones are off, right? And it's really like, so you can't separate that from the misogyny that we live in and the sexist culture that we live in, because we exist in it. And so we think that it's normal, but it's a huge stressor. And then for women who also on top of that deal with racism and other ways systemic of being stressors. Systemic stressors, we know that these have physical effects of weathering, they call it, right?
Allostatic load.
Yeah. It's just, so that's inflammation. All of that is inflammation. So when we really think about creating safe spaces for people, and maybe they want, to be in different kinds of situations that feel safe, it's really important. It's really important for people to feel like they have a safe space and that they have community, whatever that looks like for their individual situation, because that allostatic load and that weathering, that impacts, as we actually have a lot of data about this, how it impacts pregnancy, right? And birth outcomes. And we have a little bit of data around perimenopause. So that's more like the ethnographic data that says actually, Black women have higher rates of cardiovascular disease. They suffer more during perimenopause. They have more vasomotor symptoms, so hot flashes, night sweats, which are connected to cardiovascular risk.
The vasculature, yeah. And
so, you still, again, look at these inequalities across health trajectories.
Yeah.
And
you're going in compromised, essentially.
Yeah.
You're going into each phase compromised.
Already pre-depleted.
Correct.
Already pre-depleted and carrying. And then if you add in the things that we sometimes talk about, right, is like the inherited, epigenetics and the trauma from previous generations.
At the cellular level.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think, it's rare, I think, that you'd find anyone that doesn't have some kind of inherited trauma, because there's such an immigrant, community in the United States. If you go back a couple of generations, for most people, there was really a lot of hardship and trauma. And certainly for people who are descended from enslaved people, is like, that's incredible amount of trauma. And so we're, I think, probably the first generations of women to like kind of understand and then really have to kind of dig in and do that work. And it's big. It's big, and it can feel very overwhelming. And that's why we need community more than ever, right?
I think that essentially in every area that we're in, whether it's pre-puberty, puberty, teenagers, finding ways to just calm down that central nervous system, whether it's in groups of my new thing is I just want to sit in a circle of women all the time, whether it's in my community circles or my midwifery circles or my religious circles. I want to be surrounded by women. It's just my new happy place.
Right.
I think it's always been, but even more so in this phase of life where I don't have to say much. We get each other. There's no threat from the outside. It just feels good.
Right.
And so that then goes further into finding a care provider who understands you and gets you and will listen to you and will honor your lived experience. Because if you go in not feeling heard or seen or respected, you're going to go out and figure it out another way, and that could be detrimental. And so I'm so honored to have you as my guest. Tell us where my listeners and viewers can find you.
On Instagram, I used to always be Sarah the Midwife, and then I changed it. So now it's Sarah the Midlife Midwife.
Love.
So
Sarah,
it's long.
The midlife midwife. I love it. And we can look out for your course.
The course,
out soon.
Postpartum Essentials, should be coming out soon. So also follow Dr. Oscar Serrallach, and the course will be on his page and my page. And then my website is sarahshealy.com. So yeah, I'd love to have people reach out if they need support. And, this has been really lovely. What a delight.
So I feel like
it's just a delight to
light
see
years
you.
Ahead,
yes.
Light years ahead of anything I had put together about this trajectory. And I would love to have you back on the podcast at another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Discuss another part of this
100%.
incredible journey. Check out our show notes. Everything will be in there. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This has been lovely.
Thanks for listening to the Mamatoosa podcast on the Industry Plant Podcast Network. Mamatoosa is hosted by me, Atoosa Benji, and produced by Josh Stretton Carlson. Our theme music is composed by Mary Lalazarian. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider leaving us a review and subscribing. See you next Tuesday.